If somebody is feeling unfulfilled in life and they feel like they don't have any meaning, what's typically going wrong?
Oh, there's a lot of things that are could be going wrong, or some combination thereof. One is the world might be striking them as absurd or untrustworthy. We know there's been something like a collapse. Some people are calling it the trust apocalypse. People's trust in institutions, trust in each other is just declining massively. Maybe they're lonely. The number of real friends that people have is reliably declining year by year. Maybe they're beset by mental health issues of depression or anxiety that are undermining their sense of meaning. Maybe they feel radically disconnected from the world because although they may have some friends and a career and some things that, they enjoy doing, it's not clear how this connects them to what is ultimately important or real in a larger cultural or even cosmic setting. And so they might be suffering from a kind of existential issue. And all of these don't have to be isolated from each other. Frequently they're found together and frequently they're interacting with each other. It's a tough question. We know that, well, at least I would argue that evidence is clear that we shouldn't look for a single thing. There's psychological factors, there's sociological factors, there's cultural, philosophical factors, all at work.
And we talk a lot about psychology on the show and things like limiting beliefs, negative self-talk, etc., which can contribute to being unhappy in life. I would love for you to talk about things going on psychologically in the way that people think that could, warp how they see the world, how they see happiness, how they see like what they're doing in life.
Yeah. I mean, and this is, I'm working on a paper right now actually criticizing sort of the standard cultural notion that shows up in the standard psychological construct of meaning in life because of some of the dimensions that are missing from it that I think you're already putting your finger on. Meaning is not merely a descriptive term like red or green. It's what's called a thick phenomena, meaning it has a descriptive part of it and a prescriptive, like rational. If I describe you as rational, I'm not just describing you, I'm praising you. And if I say, hey, her life is really meaningful, I'm not just describing it, I'm recommending it. I'm advising you to take note of it. Now, you say, well, why does all that matter? That matters because there's an aspect of meaning in life that is developmental. You have to be aspiring to improve meaning in life because that means you can do it poorly. You may have a lot of projects, but that doesn't mean you're doing it well. And then that gets me to your point. The very processes that make us intelligently adaptive. And I think we have to ask ourselves, like, what's the adaptive function of meaning? Because it's very motivating. It's very universal. It involves many aspects of the psyche, so it's adaptive. And you have to ask, well, okay, what's the adaptive function of meaning? It seems to be about connecting, having important, deep connections, and that those connections somehow give us inner peace. They reduce inner conflict, and they increase our sense of being in contact with what's really real, not ephemeral or temporary or superficial. Okay, all that being said, now we have tremendous cognitive abilities that make us able to connect to the world. This is where the core of my scientific work is. And here's the thing about them. Those very processes that make you so adept at connecting deeply are also the same processes that make you perennially prone to self-destructive behavior. So let me give you an easy example. One really base level of this kind of connectedness that can be really undermined with sort of profound meaning in life is a sense of relevance. Things seem relevant to you and important to you. You seem relevant to things and important to them. Now, the problem with relevance is doing an important function for you. It's helping you zero in out of all the information that's available to you, all the things you could be paying attention to, all the things you could be thinking about, all the things you could be imagining, all the things you could be remembering, all the combinations. You can't check all that. So you need a process that makes you ignore a lot of it and home in on what's relevant. That makes you really intelligent. It's weird to say this, but your ability to ignore vast amounts of information really quickly is what makes you so intelligent. The problem with that is you're ignoring vast amounts of information very quickly. And that means you're always prone to actually ignoring what is true or real or really relevant in the situation. So, and you know that this happens to you. You know it when you have a moment of insight, when you say, oh, I thought she was angry, but it turns out she's afraid. You were focusing on the wrong things. You were remembering the wrong things. You were doing the wrong things. So we are always prey to self-deception. Self-deception undermines us. And that leads to addictions. That self-deceptive machinery leads to addictions. It leads to mental health problems. And so we need a way of doing something with its requires quite a bit of finesse. We have to somehow address the self-deceptive aspect of our machinery without hamstringing it, because we need it. We need it moment by moment, day by day. That takes a lot of sophisticated, complex sets of practices. And across time and culture, people did this under the term wisdom. They would be cultivating wisdom as a way of trying to enhance meaning in life reliably by addressing that self-deception. And here's the thing. For many people, they are beset by self-destructive, self-deceptive patterns of behavior. They can get some therapy for some of it, but there's large aspects of it that aren't properly addressed by therapy. They don't have anywhere to go to cultivate wisdom in a sense that they trust or that really challenges them to developmental growth.
And what do you think is the best way for people to develop mental growth over time?
What you have to understand is that your mental health refers to, the comprehensive functioning of your cognition, your brain's attempts to know the world. And what's going on is that is a massively complex. It has many, many levels to it, many, many different kinds of processes. And they're basically organized the way like an ecology is, with checks and balances. So for example, I talked about attention. Right now, you have two neural networks, right, in your brain. You have the task focus that's trying to keep you focused on task, following this conversation. And then you have another network, the default mode network, that's making your mind wander. And what you're doing is you're toggling between them. Now, why? The mind wandering is introducing variation, new things you could be thinking of or paying attention to, and you kill most of them off with your selective attention, but not all of them. And that's how you make connections. So what you need is you need practices that both train your ability to focus, but also for you to open up widely, and also to toggle between them so they're acting like checks and balances. You need practices that complement focusing inward with focusing deeply outward. You need practices that help you increase your sense of insight without making you jump to conclusions. Do you see what I mean? You have to have network of practices. They all have complementary strengths and weaknesses, and they work at multiple different levels of your cognition. So you have to take up, and you can't take it up individually. We're very poor at self-correction. We actually need the help of other people, mostly, to notice our bias. That's why you're really good at noticing other people's biases, and you're really poor, and I am too, at noticing our own. So you need to do individual and group ecologies of practices. Now, traditionally, where people did that is they had a religious home that had traditions, that had honed ecologies of practices, and had trustworthy, credible role models that they could internalize and pattern themselves on. People don't trust the religious institutions, and the cultural substitutes, politics, popular culture, entertainment, aren't cutting it. And so people are looking around. This is why so many people are spiritual but not religious. They're looking around for ecologies of practices that meet this need, but they're not. And this is not a criticism. This is a criticism of the culture, not them. But they're not well educated in how to look and how to judge and how to evaluate and how to see how well proposed practices track against the best science.
One of the things that came to mind as you were talking about meaning earlier is that when people feel like they're living their purpose, they feel like, and they have meaning in life, it feels like a state of flow. Like they're excited to go to work every day. They're excited to be around their friends. They're just excited to do all the things. Like, what's going on from a physiological perspective that allows people to feel like that?
There's a long, complex argument as soon as you put it to that level. But I'll try and give you the gist of it. And and when I move into the sort of the scientific domain, the cutting edge of my work, it's respectable, but that doesn't mean everybody will agree with what I'm saying. But this is what I have come to conclude, right? What everybody basically agrees is your brain is constantly evaluating things in terms of what's called cognitive fluency. This is sort of how well you go into situations, and you can size up situations and connect to them, like I was talking about. And then when you reconnect and improve that, that's an insight. That's that aha moment. You were not really well connected and you sort of evolved a new and better connectedness. Now, when you chain a bunch of those insights together, you get the flow state that you were talking about, where you feel really connected, you feel at one with reality, the world seems super salient, you got this ongoing sense of discovery, and people regard that as some of the best, experiences, and they're performing at their best. So this is optimal. This is this really enhanced connectedness that's going on. In fact, that's why the capacity to get into the flow state is predictive of how meaningful people find their lives. Now, here's the thing. It's very problematic, as our culture has done, to think that having a purpose, some overarching goal you're working towards, some end state you're trying to get to, is what is most conducive to that. That's a cultural specific idea, this notion that meaning in life is captured best by purpose. Purpose is only plausibly one of the factors. It doesn't matter as much as coherence and connectedness. It doesn't matter as much as trustworthiness and other things that you need. And flow isn't really about having a long-term purpose. Flow is more about how you are connected to a particular situation very, very well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people, they associate fulfillment in life with contribution to the world and making an impact in life's purpose. And so I would love for you to kind of take this a step further to talk about how you truly see life purpose, and then how people can look at this in a realistic way, so that they don't have to find a cure for cancer to think that they're contributing to society.
This is part of the problem, and you put your finger on it quite well, Doug, with this notion of purpose. And the notion of purpose is you have to get to some goal state. You have to have realized something in the world. Now, that notion of purpose is often better understood in terms of mattering, which is not so much that you create a particular state in the world, but that you're making a difference to other people and also to the world itself. And that seems to be the different thing. See, the problem with purpose, if you think about it strictly, which is, I'm going to achieve some goal, I'm going to succeed at some goal, and you put your finger on it very well. Well, many goals you won't succeed at because they're really daunting. I want to alleviate global hunger. Well, you can make a difference to that. Are you going to succeed at it? Probably not. All right. And then let's suppose you actually did achieve your goal. I'm going to become the CEO of a major corporation. And there you are. You're the CEO. And now what do you do with your life? You see, so it's much more important to think about, do I make a difference? And do I make a difference to things that have an intrinsic value? Do I make a difference to the quality of meaning in other people's lives? Do I make a difference how well or even how beautiful the world is showing up for people? Do I contribute to there being more true knowledge available? Do I contribute to the people cultivating wisdom, reducing self-deception, dealing with issues around guilt and addiction? Do I do those kinds of things?
In a world where people want gratification instantly to see if what they're doing actually matters, how do you measure effectively whether or not you're helping somebody else with their meaning, whether you're doing good for other people, whether or not you're helping people see more truth? Like how do you measure that in a way where people can feel like they're being part of the solution?
You're being quite insightful, if you'll allow me to say. That's the problem. The problem of instant gratification is extremely deleterious. It undermines the attempt to get meaning in life. The problem with instant gratification is the chances that you've connected to something that's long-lasting, that's not superficial, that's deep, that's real as opposed to or illusory or just some fad, right? Is like that. The more instant you try to get signal back, the less chance you will have achieved those features. And that's actually the features that meaning is looking for. I mean, we're at the opposite of where we used to be. For example, in the Middle Ages, people would commit to the building of cathedrals that took several generations to complete. And so it's not like obviously you need sort of feedback if you're connected, but instant gratification isn't the right model. Instant gratification is to fundamentally confuse pleasure with meaning. And that is a significant mistake. So, for example, if you're using measures of pleasure or well-being or how good you feel, how many good feelings you're having, right? Notice something. When you have a child, all those measures of subjective well-being go down. Your pleasure goes down, your finances go down, your health goes down, you're not sleeping, you're wet, you're hungry all the time, your significant other doesn't like you anymore. All this is happening. And why do people have kids? Well, it makes their life more meaningful because they're connected to something that's real, a long-term project, lasting, significant, not superficial, etc. But if you calibrate yourself to instant gratification marked by pleasure and good feeling, you are not tracking what you need to track in yourself and in reality to see if you actually have meaning in life.
So what do you think people should track?
What I think people should track is how connected they are to people and how connected they are to reality. Where connected doesn't mean having. This is a real big problem with our standard notion of meaning. I have to have lots of friends. I have to, I have to have hobbies. I have to have a career. This is not having. Having is about, the needs, the biologically usually basic needs you need in order to survive. Having needs are important. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. That's why we have pleasure. Pleasure tells us what the having needs are met. I eat some food. It's good. I have some sex. Those are those. But meaning is about developmental needs. These are needs that are not met by having something. They're needs that are met by becoming something. So how much are you in love? And I don't just mean romantic love. Quietly sit back. How much friendship love do you have? How much love do you have for the culture that you're in, the community you're in? How much love do you have for the institutions around you? How much love do you have for reality? And if the answer is not very much, then you need to say, well, what can I do from my end? And what can I do by getting other people involved to make it more and more possible for people to fall in love so that they can go through that developmental growth that is the mark of enhanced meaning in life.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that trips people up regarding meaning is they feel like, you hear a lot in the recovery community, you need to be connected to something greater than yourself, be of service, and that in many ways gets attached to having meaning and purpose in life. How do you see that idea, and how can people better understand it based on what science says?
Well, I mean, being connected to something larger than yourself is a metaphor. It's not literally the case. If I chain you to a locomotive, you don't go, oh, I feel so much more meaning. And it's not just about ability to move large amounts of matter and energy around. We can individually, we move titanic amounts of energy and matter around compared to people in other cultures at other times. That doesn't have any tracking about how meaningful we find our lives. So we have to put aside those metaphors that come very readily to mind. When you say you want to be connected to something larger, a better way to think about it is like this. Think about when you're in a dream and you're in this world, and inside that world, it seems real. That's a little world because you wake up, right, to the bigger world, the real world, and that real world allows you to see the biases, the flaws, the lack of connection to reality in your little dream world. This is why we have metaphors of awakening, waking up, enlightenment, the light casting, coming into a greater world. That's what we're actually looking for. We're looking for a way in which we are in a world that allows us to better correct ourselves and connect ourselves, to other people, and the world. So you could be at service But if you were serving a lot of people, if you were connected to something and you're just thinking about, oh, well, I have this and I have all these people and look at all the things I'm doing, and you're doing that from a very egocentric, narcissistic attitude, that's not going to help you. That's not going to help you. It's not going to help you at all. But if in the moments of service, you have moments of resonance, like what Rosa talks about, moments where you see how deeply mysterious human beings are, you get that moment of connection to, you're serving somebody and you realize, oh, I really have misframed people. I don't get it. I need to learn. I need to grow. That's the kind of thing so service in and of itself is not necessarily the issue. The issue is, are you growing in realization, and are you helping other people to mature in their ability to face up to reality?
We started our conversation. I asked you, like, if people aren't feeling fulfilled in life, what's typically going wrong, if they feel like they don't have meaning or purpose. And, you hear a lot about mental health, the relationship between mental health struggles and lack of meaning and purpose. I would love for you to expand on that as much as possible to talk about what's going on there.
So if you think about, there's a lot going on in mental health, okay? Like I've been saying multiple times, everything is what's called multivariate. Most psychological phenomena have multiple factors. There's biological factors, there's social factors, there's economic factors. So I'm not talking about mental health in total. I'm talking about what I can talk about. I'm talking about the cognitive factors, the factors about how we know the world. What's typically going on in the cognitive factors of mental health is people are misframing the world. Remember I talked about, you're screening off, you're filtering off. Your mind is creating a constant lens that makes you more focused on some things and less focused on other things. What's going wrong, for example, in anxiety? There's too much attention being given to low probability things. So the anxious most of us find low probability things that we can sort of have a blip and consider. It's not salient. It doesn't grab our attention. We go, oh yeah, when I get out of bed, I might trip, but come on, I can't live that way. But the purpose with anxiety, that ability to screen off those low probability threats is not as good. So they tend to find salient things they shouldn't find salient. And so they're overwhelmed by a world that seems beyond comprehension. That's what anxiety is. It has to do with this mistuning of this ability to zero in on what's relevant. That's why, we've seen the mindfulness revolution. I have criticisms of it, but mindfulness is largely, one of the things it does is it helps you become aware of how you're paying attention. Like we treat these mental glasses are like my glasses right now. They're mostly transparent. We're not aware of them. We're looking through them, and because of that, we don't see them. In mindfulness, you step back and you look at the lens, that mental lens, and you learn to see how it might be distorting how you are framing the world. Same thing with depression. Same thing with a lot of mental health things. Now, because of that, because of all this misframing, the ability to find the world coherent, the ability to connect deeply, the ability to get into a developmental falling in love with reality is impaired and undermined. You can't fall in love with a world that is striking you as overwhelmingly threatening, like is in anxiety, or a world that is overwhelmingly lacking in doing things that you can consider significant or highly relevant, which is what's the case in depression.
I think on top of that, there's a couple things as it relates to meaning that people have a really hard time with. And maybe we can break these down one at a time. The two things are, number one, how do I find meaning in life when things aren't going my way, when things are tough? And two, how do I find meaning in my past when my past was so horrific and horrible, or I made some poor decisions? I would love for you to break down those two things.
Yes. So let's do the first one. So the answer I'm going to give is very analogous to the answer that you have when you're practicing in both senses a martial art. You don't try and learn how to street fight when you're in a street fight. That's too late. You have to build up skills. You have to build up alternative states of consciousness, different perspective taking. You have to learn how to re-inhabit your body. You have to build up character traits. You need all of that when you come into that really demanding situation that is threatening you. Similarly, you can't say, well, what do I do now when I'm in this situation where meaning in life is being threatened? That's the wrong time. That is the wrong time. This is what I mean by a wisdom famine. We give people sort of meaning pablum, and we tell them to evaluate that very superficially. So, oh yeah, my life's meaningful. I've got some friends. I've got my work, right? Everything is okay. I'm making enough money. And then their mother unexpectedly dies. And none of that gruel is deeply nourishing enough to help them in a situation like that. It goes back to your point about instant gratification. There's no magic bullet for meaning in life. There's no, well, if I just think this way, or I say these things to myself, or I just buy this, I'll be okay. It doesn't work that way. Your cognition is way too complex, way too dynamic. You have to, way ahead of time, build deep reservoirs of meaning that point you, that orient you. They give you a sense of what your ultimate standpoint is, what your ultimate stance is, so you can meet these ultimate demands on you by having some connection to what you consider to be ultimately real, ultimately affording of your ability to grow and grow other people. And again, that's what religion used to do for people. I'm not here preaching about religion. I'm here, what a sentence. I'm here saying, we're doing something that has never been done before across history, across cultures. We are secularizing. There's a lot of legitimate reasons for that. I'm not here saying, oh, we should all do X or Y, Z. But what we forget is that there was a tremendous functionality, an adaptive functionality to religion that we've thrown out, which was religion was the practice of the cultivation of wisdom and an orientation to ultimate meaning. You get this in sort of philosophical schools like Epicureanism, Stoicism, Buddhism, but you have to practice these a lot. So when the deep event happens, you have a deep reservoir to meet it. It's too late. I'm sorry, this is hard news, but it's too late. It's like, well, I'm suddenly in a street fight. I'm going to learn how to do mixed martial arts. Too late. Too late.
When it comes to the other side of that, one of the hardest parts of my recovery journey early on was making peace with my past, and specifically just regret in the way that I treated myself and treated other people. So how can people deal with that side of things?
So first of all, there's an adaptive thing going on there. So most real transformation taps into what's called memory reconsolidation. So your memory is not like the memory of a computer. Your memory doesn't like store things accurately and precisely. That's actually not very adaptive, by the way. If I'll say something to you, your memory is not about the past. Your memory is about the future, right? Your memory's job is not to accurately recall your past. Your memory's job is to intelligently prepare you for the future. So what your memory is constantly doing is taking different pieces of information, erasing some, expanding others, and weaving things together that actually didn't happen together in reality. That's what you're constantly doing. And so we pay a price for that. We remember our past very inaccurately. 49% of eyewitness testimony in criminal cases is actually false. Okay, so you have like false to varying degrees, but like significant enough to make a legal difference, right? And so you have to understand that. Here, let me give you one example. This is a standard experiment. I'm going to give people some screens to watch, and there's random dot patterns on it. Here's one, here's one, here's one, here's one. I give you 4 or 5 of those. Then I'm going to give you some ones you haven't seen yet, and I'm going to ask you, which of the new ones have you seen before? Now, what I do is I take all of those random ones, all the ones you've had, and I calculate their mathematical average. You never saw that pattern of dots, but it's a mathematical average of all the ones you've seen. That's the one you're most confident you've seen before. You never saw it. But what it does is it shows how much your brain is trying to do this. You have to understand, therefore, that you're dealing with a degree of narrative and reconstruction when you're dealing with your regret. Your brain is not working in terms of the accuracy of the information. It's working in terms of the meaningfulness of the information. And if you confuse those together, you can get locked and trapped. I'm obviously not saying ignore what you think is true or anything ridiculous like that. But when you're dealing with that, the meaning is often being generated very automatically and unconsciously. So I'll give you a standard Buddhist response to your question. You are probably, even though you're using regret, you're probably feeling guilt. Now, guilt is a way in which we punish ourselves because there's a gap between our ideal self and our real self. And we let all of that machinery run automatically. What you need to do is ask this: can you replace backwards-looking guilt, which is a sense of punishment, with forward-looking, intelligent regret? Well, but what can I learn from that such that I can go forward? And secondly, I should take a look at the gap between my real self and my ideal self. Is this a legitimate difference? Is this something I should automatically accept? Is my guilt driven by an inappropriate standard? How much compassion am I actually showing to myself? If you can get people to take the same attitude towards themselves in the past that they take to other people that are their good friends, they generally, and do that sincerely, not pretense, but do that sincerely, they can start to get alleviation from that kind of entrapment that you're talking about.
Now, one of the things myself and a lot of people in the personal development space have said and say over the years is that your pain can become your purpose. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, given all the qualifications I've made about purpose, I think that's exactly what I was proposing. See, pain is backwards looking. Purpose is forward orientation. So you actually tap into what your memory wants to do, which is reorient you towards the future. But part of that reorientation, like think about like just physical navigation. You're in the woods somewhere and you want to orient. We have to have a good sense of who you are and what your situation is. So yes, get future oriented, but also spend some time, right, getting outside of your autobiography. If you're going to do that pain into purpose, stop thinking, this is a particular bias we have, that your autobiographical, the story you tell about your life, is the best information to get about yourself. I'm going to use a metaphor here. Try to stop consulting your autobiography so much and find what your owner's manual is, right? Like for a car that tells what all the parts are and how they function and how they should be maintained. How much of that knowledge have you cultivated? You got to get your owner's manual in good operation. Or if you want to use a computer metaphor, your operating system, before you run any program. So I think it's right to turn your pain into your purpose in the sense of moving from backwards oriented punishment to forward oriented learning. And I think that's right. But that learning isn't about just reinterpreting your autobiography. It's it's Socratic knowing yourself, knowing the processes, patterns, and principles of your cognition. That is what is really needed.
This episode is brought to you by Live On Labs. If you are someone who is constantly stressed, feeling depleted, and exhausted, I have some exciting news. My friends at Live On Labs have an incredible deal I can offer you. When you buy any product at full price, you get a free carton of their highly popular B-complex product, which I take every day. Taking a B-complex supplement can also help support things like a healthy metabolism, increased energy, blood sugar balance, and learning. Vitamin B supplements can help replenish nutrients depleted from stress. Live On Labs puts years of research into each product, which is why I stand behind them. Using liposome encapsulation technology, these products promote elite absorption so the supplements get into your cells and give you the best benefits that you're looking for. Right now, you can get a free carton of Lipospheric B Complex Plus, which is a $56 value with any full price purchase from liveonlabs.com. This supplement has the B vitamins and minerals that you need to help turn food into sustained natural energy throughout the day. Just add B Complex Plus and any other full price supplement to your cart and enter code BOPES24 at checkout to get this amazing deal. Now back to the show. I think, a lot of times people will, taking this like a step further, maybe like a step sideways, I guess I could say, a lot of times when people are looking to start like a business endeavor or follow their passion, a lot of times, and I've done this, like I became a personal trainer because my cellmate got me into fitness when I was incarcerated on felony drug charges, and that saved my life. So I felt that, I went through this experience and now I can help others. Is there validity to that when people are like looking to take some of their painful moments in their life and create something where they're helping other people?
Very much. I mean, that's one of the Buddhist recommendations of replacing guilt, which is self-focused, with intelligent regret, which is other and world-focused, which is instead of like, how can I prevent this pain from ever happening to me again? It's like, wait, I learned something. It sounds to me like you learned this when you were incarcerated. You need somebody outside of you to help you break out of the biases and mental gridlock you're in order to really break free. Then you realize, wait, I could help other people better than they might be able to help themselves. And I want to reduce the suffering of other people significantly. Yes, I think that's important. But along with this, here, let me give you an example as more concrete. We think about suffering in terms of just pain, and that's the wrong model, because suffering isn't just pain. Suffering is the loss of agency. So when you're beset by a sense that the world really has no options for you, you may not be experiencing pain as your affective state. You may be experiencing profound boredom or a profound sense of not really being present. That's not so much pain. That's a sense of a loss of agency. Loneliness, it's painful in one sense, but it's also deleterious to your health because you're losing agency. So when you think about, like, of course, people that alleviate pain, my beautiful partner, she's a dentist. That's great. But she doesn't just alleviate pain. She tries to enhance people's dental agency, their knowledge of how their teeth work, how to keep healthy, etc. I'm using that as an analogy. You have to think much more comprehensively.
I think that when people are going through life, like there's so much meaning that can be found along the journey. A lot of meaning that comes from the messes in our life, a lot of meaning that comes from the connections we make, the relationships that we have. However, so many people, including myself throughout times in my life, have found it hard sometimes to enjoy the journey because you're so used to like the things that are coming at you.
And Doug, you said it well. That is my problem with the very limited notion and the overemphasis on purpose, because it prevents you from, as you just said, enjoying the journey, growing in the journey. In the end, and I want to be a little bit stark here, in the end, we all die, right? And so you have, like, if the intrinsic value isn't in the movement through your life, that's problematic when you have to face your mortality.
And I think that sometimes people equate the journey with being mundane, right? And sometimes, like, enjoying that part of as being mundane, because like, oh, like if I'm just enjoying the journey, like what do I get to celebrate and all these things? So like, how do you advise people based on everything to be able to, I mean, not have this level of toxic positivity, I guess you should say, where you're happy all the time, but to be able to like really enjoy life and find meaning in even the little things?
Well, first of all, I want to go into the word you're using and recover it. Enjoy comes from being within joy, and joy is not the same thing as pleasure. There are many things where you've probably experienced profound joy, but calling them pleasurable is probably a mistake. So joy is your sense of being connected to something that really matters. That's what joy is, and positively. So you're connected to something really matters, and there is growth and development, increase in people's virtue and virtuosity is happening. So yeah, you don't want that toxic sort of giddy sense of what we now think of happiness as. The ancients thought of happiness as a very comprehensive thing. They thought of it as a combination of pleasure, of meaning, of virtue and virtuosity. And so the way to enjoy is to properly appreciate in both senses of the word. When we appreciate something, we really understand it. We also really value it. Properly appreciate all the ways in which you are connecting in a way that affords you overcoming self-deception, finding inner peace, getting more connected to reality, and affording that to other people. And you have to practice this the way you have to practice a martial art. You have to practice. And the problem is we trivialize everything. Stop and smell the roses. We think, oh, what that means is, you break and you get a little bit of pleasure, a dopamine hit, and then you go back on. That's not the original meaning. Here, look, the original meaning if you go back into where this is coming up, is to realize something. The rose doesn't have a purpose. I mean, it has a biological function, but the rose just is, right? And what's happening is there's no great function to you smelling the rose. What's happening is there's a moment of beauty. There's an experience where appearances aren't deceiving or deceptive or being used to manipulate you. They're getting you to resonate, to see something mysterious or deeper in reality. And you have to practice that. You have to practice seeing that in other people, seeing that in yourself, seeing that in a meal, seeing that in a rose, seeing that. Now, we all have moments of resonance. It's winter here in Canada. You happen to turn a corner and then there's a beautiful snowfall you didn't expect. And you feel called to pause because there's something uncontrollable and mysterious about that nevertheless calls you beyond your mundane existence. So you have to practice this. And you can't just practice it guided by feeling. You have to practice this guided by development of skills, development of traits, development of alternative states of consciousness. This is why psychedelics are so massively popular right now, because people are trying to change their state of consciousness. They're trying to learn how to see and be in the world differently.
I guess for people that are listening to this or watching this and they're like hearing you talk about instant gratification and how that can really prevent you from living a truly meaningful life. Like, what are some steps you think people could take that would like help them transform their relationship with the way they see pleasure, gratification, and be able to have more meaning in life?
You've got to start practicing. You got to start training, being able to open up your vision, zooming out and zooming in. You've got to be able to, you've got to do some serious mindfulness practices. You need to do some serious journaling and reflective practices. You need to do some serious dialogical practices where you learn to get into those living conversations with other people that take on a life of their own. And you'll say, well, that's hard. Of course it's hard. If all of these things were easy, we would all be leading lives of exemplary meaning. Spinoza said it. It's excellent because it's rare, because the excellent things are rare. Like, you have to practice this. You have to practice mindfulness practices. You have to practice reflective practices. You have to practice dialogical practices. You have to train your imagination so it's not taking you away from reality, but taking you more deeply into reality. And there's lots of recommendations for doing this. You need a set of practices. You have to make sure they have complementary strengths and weaknesses. Try to choose practices that only have really good philosophical, psychological, and scientific vetting to them.
What about the people who are like, well, I do just fine living my life and trying to be successful and happy. I don't need to necessarily go on this quest to find like meaning in life. How do you feel about that?
You're lucky, is what I'm telling them. And he who lives by luck dies by luck. Right? If the world is relatively stable and you can successfully ignore your self-deception and your foolishness and your mortality and the way in which you are harming other people and perhaps making the world more ugly by your negligence, you're lucky. I predict that that luck will not last throughout your life, and you will hit periods where all of that gets shattered, called into question. And like I said, you're now like the person who says, I get by. What do I need a martial art for? I get by. And then suddenly they're mugged unexpectedly, and they have nothing in reserve to deal with it.
I know we've touched on this, talked about it a little bit, but I would love to go deeper. A lot of times people attach, again, meaning to achievement, specifically like at work. They're like, okay, if I am contributing at work and doing a good job, then I should be getting promoted. I should be making more money. And they see that same thing with even in like relationships. If things are going good, things should be progressing, and maybe we're going to get married, like all these things. Like, how can people begin to separate meaning from achievement?
Well, I mean, you don't want to totally separate it. Having achievement, which is feedback that you have the ability to show a certain amount of virtuosity and mastery over your environment, is important, because if you don't have that, though, like if you're not getting any achievement signals, those are signals that your agency isn't working properly. And one of the things you want is your agency to constantly be functioning well. Your ability to direct your action and change your behavior in order to change the consequences of your action. That's what agency means. So you don't want to be totally divorced, but I get your point, and your point's a good one. So let's take your example. Well, I'm at work. I'll do myself, just to show that I'm not the scientist who thinks he's somehow superior because he's outside and talking about the situation. So, I work at the university. I enjoy my work. I teach other students, but I zoom out and I think I've really got some deep questions about the university as an institution and its overall cultural role right now. And are those legitimate things to think about? Yeah, I should think about those things. I would be irresponsible if I didn't. And then when I think about those things is, well, I'm contributing to an institution and I wonder if I should be because, oh yeah, I'm like, maybe there's something fundamentally wrong, right? And then you might zoom out a little bit more. And you say, well, it's part of a bigger problem. It's a bigger problem in our culture, right? About how institutions are supposed to be functioning. We know reliably we're at all-time low in North America across the board for our trust in institutions. The institutions of science, knowledge, communication, media, religion, politics, economics. People, it's like, if you're contributing to something and you can't, that contribution, that achievement doesn't also educate you to be able to address these larger questions that you should address, then achievement is taking up too much of your meaning real estate. You should be thinking, yeah, but what skills and virtues am I training at work that transfer to my life in general and give me the capacity to reflect on the institutions and the culture within which I'm working? And if your answer is it doesn't seem to do much of that, then you're in a problem. I work with as a consultant with somebody who goes into businesses and he doesn't go in and offer new technology. He doesn't go offer efficiency or anything like that. He goes in and he diagnoses the work culture and he helps people fix that up so that what people are doing in their work allows them to potentially take it home and also address these bigger issues. And what happens is the companies inevitably get better. They end up making more money. They end up acting more efficiently because you are actually encouraging people not to cocoon and bubble, right? Well, I've got my job. Again, we all need our jobs. I'm not unsympathetic. But if we're talking about meaning in life, if this is important to you, and it should be, then you have to be more than satisfied with just your achievements, your career successes, your trophies. I mean, in the end, your trophies don't matter as much as, think about, we do this sometimes with people. You're facing your death. You're facing your imminent death. What are the things that are going to have mattered to you? Your trophies? That's not what people say when they do death reflection. They talk about their relationships, the deep connections that they've made. That's what matters to them and gives them the capacity to face imminent death.
You mentioned people have this lack of trust in things, and I agree. Obviously, there's plenty of that going on, on both sides of every aisle, right? But I think the problem becomes, then people just become so negative and like cynical towards the world, and I don't think that's healthy either, And so, how can people begin, or do I should say, like how can they stay optimistic about themselves and the world that we live in before they fall into the trap of thinking that everyone's out to get them?
Well, the problem we're facing is a particular instance of the tragedy of the commons. You know what the tragedy of the commons is? Like, for example, stocks start to go down, so you sell your stocks, and then she sells her stocks, and then the stock market can collapse, kind of thing. The tragedy of the commons. And this is a pervasive problem we have. So what happens? Trust is built on shared meaning in life. I trust you. This is why religion used to make people trustworthy to us, because we know that independent of their personal projects, trophies, and achievements, we shared the same vision and values. These are the dimensions of meaning in life that I'm talking about here. So we don't have shared meaning. So we don't trust. So what do is we cocoon. This is one of my critiques of our current sense of meaning in life. It's radically individualistic. I cocoon and I look for, well, what's in my life. I have this and this, and I have this little cocoon. The problem is the more we cocoon our meaning in life and think it's just an individual, purely subjective phenomena, we're not concerned about how shareable is our meaning in life. We actually cause more distrust to build. And then we're tempted to cocoon more, and it starts to become a vicious cycle. And then here's the problem. I can't really correct myself. Meaning in life is developmental. It's not something you have, it's something you become. I'm not really good at correcting myself. I need you. But if I don't trust you, I can't rely on you. I won't turn to you to help me correct myself as I pursue my own little cocooned meaning in life. So I get this cocoon that gets ever smaller and tighter. The world seems more and more hostile, and my ability to penetrate this cocoon and correct and cultivate wisdom gets reduced. And so we get an ongoing cascading tragedy of the commons in which we shrink more and more. But look at what COVID showed us. When we're actually forced into that little cocoon, we go crazy. We can't actually live in that cocoon. It doesn't work. We go crazy in a really powerful way. And so we have to get outside of what Paul Ricoeur calls a hermeneutics of suspicion, where we're suspecting everybody for a secret agenda or an unconscious motive or some malevolent thing. The only way we do that is, again, to do something like what religion did. I'm not saying we have to become religious, but we have to not think about meaning as an individual personal property or project. What's primary about meaning is how shareable it is. This is why we use the term meaning. It's like the meaning of a term. Lewis Carroll, I forget who it is. Is it the tortoise? You can't just, meaning isn't an individual thing. I can't use the word clock to refer to the depths of the ocean. It doesn't make any, but wow, I'll just use words however I want. Soon as you use words completely individually and idiosyncratically, they lose their meaning. Because meaning is shareable, because it requires mutual correction. When we cocoon, it feels like we're doing what we have to do, but we're ultimately undermining the meaning we're trying to cling on to. Did that make sense as an argument?
Totally. And John, I think this is a great place for us to close our convo. I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you. I think the audience is going to get a lot of meaning and enjoyment out of this episode. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Doug. It was a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
You got it, man.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.